Hi, I'm Dr. Archie Johnson. In this brief video, I want to talk a little bit about what I would call my narrative approach to a number of things, especially clinical treatment, clinical neuroscience, and of course, as a Christian, from a Christian worldview. My early beginnings, I'm going to take you back just for a moment to how I originated, how I began to think about what I'm doing today. I know I mentioned this in bits and pieces in some other videos and lectures, and I want to bring my viewing audience up to par about what brings me into the kind of work that I do today. I was around some early amazing people who were mentors of mine, who were tremendous scholars in the field, whether in modern medicine and the neurosciences and philosophy, theology, law, and those disciplines. And I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my life, and so what I began to pursue was the study of philosophy. I was challenged once by a friend who said, if you study philosophy, then you're definitely not going to become or stay a Christian. And so I decided that challenge was quite a big one, so I decided to pursue this direction about what philosophy can offer us, and especially in terms of the comprehensive perspective I was looking for, maybe call it a worldview. And so when I began to study philosophy, I began to see, wait a minute, there's some really deep answers here, some answers that can really be helpful for me and from others and for others. I remember that there was a loss of truth in my generation, and I think in subsequent generations too. And maybe to many historians that this has been going on for at least 80 years, the loss of truth, the loss of a comprehensive worldview. In one of my audio lectures, I talk about the Grundfragen, the introduction to what a worldview should be, or for you philosophical buffs out there, kind of a starting point, a poustu or a prolegomena, a beginning of developing a way of thinking, a Christian worldview. As I'm producing this video, at the moment there's some really turbulent things going on today. Supreme Court nomination of Kavanaugh is taking place, and we just saw on TV yesterday a bunch of controversy and how accusers are accusing Judge Kavanaugh, one in particular, and many others now are coming forth as to what would be some despicable allegations, sexual allegations, and some pretty profound claims. And so as I began to see snips and bits and pieces, I began to think, where do we find the truth? How do we determine truth? And in our postmodern world today, one of the definitions of truth is that truth is what your friends let you get away with. And I know that as a philosopher, that does not fit in well with a correspondence theory of truth. The truth is what happens in accordance with reality as things are. And so some philosophers want to debate this between a correspondence view of truth and a coherent view of truth. I think I prefer to think that there's always going to be a combination of the two. I would take a center position that there is truth, there is absolute truth, and that especially in a day such as ours, that there needs to be an understanding of what is this worldview, and especially if you're a Christian like I am, then the Christian worldview is very important to you. I had a former mentor of mine who in the late 50s wrote a book called The Uneasy Conscience of Modern Fundamentalism. And the professor's name was Dr. Karl Henry. Even though I didn't formally have classes with him, I was very fortunate to take some workshops with him, and especially when I finished my PhD, I was able to actually be in a full-day workshop with him as an attendant. It was quite an experience to be with Dr. Henry. Dr. Henry wrote this book in the 50s, The Uneasy Conscience of Modern Fundamentalism. And what Dr. Henry was talking about was the beginnings of what we today would call maybe a conservative movement, a conservative evangelical movement. And as a result of that conservative movement, what he meant by fundamentalism was not the kind of fundamentalism that began to develop in the American culture in the late 60s and 70s. And so when I began to start reading some of these early books, I began to develop this hunger, this yearning for a Christian worldview, and to understand all things from a Christian perspective. There was an early writer who said something like this: we can talk about the secular mind, we can talk about the scientific mind, we can talk about the philosophical mind, and we can talk about the medical mind. But when it comes to being a Christian mind, when we talk about a Christian mind, that mind no longer exists. And folks, I see that even more prevalent today, the loss of a Christian mind, the loss of a Christian worldview. I was talking to a father this morning about where his daughter wants to go to school, and she's interested in music, she's just interested in the arts, interested in culture. And then when I mentioned a particular school, a particular university like Liberty University, for a place that a lot of people, I know friends of mine have gone there, a lot of well-known people, I know some of the professors there too, and so I was encouraging maybe for his daughter to take a look at Liberty University. And in my brief conversations that I had in the past with Reverend Jerry Falwell, that Dr. Falwell said to me that because of the gifts that God had provided Liberty University in particular, that they were able to attract some of the finest professors, create some of the finest departments in the country. And so I told my friend this morning to talk to his daughter about that, since she's interested in music and the arts and things like that. Well, see, folks, what's happened ever since the 50s, when that book came along, The Uneasy Conscience of Modern Fundamentalism, is that we've lost this Christian perspective. We've lost this worldview that would go something like this, and this comes from the Dutch, from the Dutch philosophers and thinkers who were Christian, and this is a phrase that means a lot to me. This is a passage that means the world to me, and that the folks at the Free University of Amsterdam said, one in particular who said, that there's not an inch of life where Christ has not said, "This is mine." And what I understand that to mean is that all of life, or his story, is about the Christian worldview. Whether if you're studying music, whether if you're studying law, whether if you're studying medicine, that we want to look at it from a Christian perspective, from a Christian worldview. But yet, since the 50s, we've lost this Christian mindset, I believe. And then now it's been going on now for maybe more than 80 years now. And I think that some of the problems that we see in American politics today, in American culture, we see the loss of this Christian worldview. And I think that that's very, very serious, folks. And I think that one of my passions is I write books, and I'm updating The Talking Cure, which should come out in a second edition. Hopefully sometime this year. I've got a couple of new books coming out as well. One I'm calling The Christian Cure, and then one I'm calling the Kairos Cure, and that you can find out more about these and some of these other lectures I've given. But my focus is that every facet of life, whether it's law, whether it's philosophy, theology, has to be seen through the grid, through the worldview of Christianity. And I believe that that's the case. I'm not arguing for the separation, to blend church and state together. That's not what I'm arguing for at all. I totally support the First Amendment, properly understood. I definitely support that. I love the Constitution and would support the American constitutionalists, forms of federalism, and of course the original intent, and some relational ways of trying to understand that as well. But folks, I think that the loss of a Christian worldview is the fundamental problem facing us today. And I believe it's my passion, and I would pray that it's your passion, that you can also begin to think Christianly as a way of life, whatever you're seeing and reading and whatever you're looking at, watching, that you would look at it in a Christian, and Christianly, in a Christian worldview perspective. So what I do is, if I'm reading a book, whether it's secular or not, if I'm watching a movie, whether it's secular or not, whether I'm reading something even Christian, I'm looking at it through the eyes of the Christian worldview. I want to be savvy. I want to have the mind of the Lord. As Jesus told the disciples in many places in the Gospels, he says, you still think the way men think. You don't think the way God thinks. And I think that's a terrible indictment, folks. That how could it be that I'm still thinking as a man, and I'm not thinking in terms of this Christian transcendent, this Christian worldview. And I think that that's very important, that we're able to see that. But I think that part of our problem today, and this is the problem, I think, in terms of my field now, as I practice as a clinical psychoanalyst who's majored and has a heavy major in the neurosciences and the relational neurosciences. You see, as those who know me, that I'm arguing my Copernican vision is to argue for the resurrection and revolution of relationship, and the missing ingredient in my life and your life is what is the quality of relationship that I'm offering you. That's the mark of maturity. That's what the Christian worldview is all about. We're here to learn how to love. We're here to glorify God. Yes, as I've said in other places, we're to worship God. We're to glorify Him. We're also here to share the Christian message, but not the message of fragmentation, not the message of law and gospel, but to offer a relational, cultural, a worldview perspective that can say that I'm not afraid of studying philosophy. I'm not afraid of studying medicine. I'm not afraid of studying heavy duty things like even psychoanalysis, because I see all things through the Christian lens, the Christian worldview. Most people ask me, because you're a psychoanalyst, because you did the postdoctoral work, not only did you do the PhD in professional psychology, focus in dynamic psychiatry and philosophical theology, you went and studied 4 more years in a postdoctoral fellowship, and then silly Arch, I went back to the school and I studied formally a full program in clinical psychoanalysis in New York, with spots in London and of course in spots in Boston. The reality is, why did you do that? Does that mean that you have given up the Christian worldview? And I say, of course not. Of course not. But I seriously embrace the mindset of the Christians that were at the Free University of Amsterdam in the better part of the 20th century. The folks who said that we have to look at life through the Christian lens, through the Christian worldview. So what I've said to folks before, and those who've been following some of my videos here, you'll see that what I'm teaching is that I'm not Freudian. When people say, "Are you an analyst?" Does that mean you're a Freudian? And I say, no, I'm not typically committed to any one particular ideology. But I can tell you this. I can tell you that I'm here to finish the project. And the project, as I mentioned previously on these different videos, the project is that for about 25, 30 years, that the smartest scientists on the planet, who are trained in Vienna, who are trained in Germany and France, that the doctors of the day, the geniuses, the Nobel Prize winners of that day, the Nobel laureates, were saying we need to do more than look at medicine from a reductionistic or dualistic standpoint, where we divide body and soul, that we look at things in terms of reduction, that we're taking the complexity of the human being, the body, the brain, the mind, and we reduce that to its silly reduction, to the point, the silliest components, that we break it down. And this, folks, I mentioned before, this is the problem with modern medicine. It's the problem with modern science, is that we tend to become reductionist and we don't know what that means. So just a quick example you've heard before. So when a patient says to me, my doctor says I have a chemical imbalance, so she wants me to see you so you can recommend a particular antidepressant for her. Do I need something like Zoloft or a serotonin reuptake inhibitor? And I say, so you have this chemical imbalance. See, folks, that's the reductionism I'm talking about. And it's a fallacy. It's a logical, it's a scientific fallacy. And yet, because we lack the training, we lack the mindset of a Christian worldview, then we're going to continue to see things in bits and pieces. And I think that's a huge mistake today. So what I'm saying to folks, we have to finish the project. And the project is that now for the first time in over 150 years, that we can now actually take the brain, mind, and body, and that we can put them back together, and that we can do a rewiring process. And my phrase that you'll remember, when two brains learn how to fire together, they can rewire together, and they can survive together. And this comes out of the early genetic studies that have replaced Mendel, as you've heard, that these are now the HEB, H-E-B-B, the epigenetics, and all that's come out of that, that we can actually turn on genes, we can uptake, we can downregulate, we can do that to the nervous system, and then we can also learn how to deal with stress. I have so much to say and so much to offer my viewing audience, and that I'm attempting right now to consolidate a lot of the topics so you can begin to see with me that the Christian worldview provides the necessary cohesion so that we can look at medicine, so we can look at modern law, Anglo-American law, that we can look at all these disciplines, and that we don't want to fall in the fallacy or rely on the fallacy of we're looking at things in bits and pieces. For those of you who are listening and have studied law like I have 2 law degrees, and if you study law, you would see that the law is basically the checks and balances for folks who have broken nervous systems, whether they're going to commit arson, whether they're going to commit larceny, whether they're going to break and enter, whether they're going to commit the different degrees of murder and things like that, or the property laws, the check and balances there, contract law. What do you do? Promissory estoppel, consideration, tort law, respondeat superior. What are we going to erase? Ipsa loquitur. All these different legal terms that we learn in law. But the law is essentially the checks and balances for people. It's to try to get at some way to curb the behaviors, the misbehaviors, the bad actions, the bad intent, the mens rea and the actus rea, the guilty mind and the guilty behavior. You see, folks, the absence of a Christian worldview is at the center of why I think we're struggling, and why I think it's happening in modern treatment today, in modern medicine, modern psychiatry, modern psychology, is I believe that we've sold our birthright, that we've given it to the world, and we're letting the world decide and set the tone for how we're going to see people, how we're going to love God, how we're going to love others. So my project is an intense one, and my project is in my lifetime, Lord willing, that I want to pick up what some of my early mentors did, people that I would say were very dear in my life, whether in law, whether in psychology, whether in medicine, whether in philosophy, but to pick up this project and to take it to new levels, just like we do on our iPhones or whatever phone you have, on our software upgrade on your computer. You see, folks, we need the upgrade, and the upgrade would include the loss of a relational worldview, a vision of how God is relational and how we're wired to be relational. And so, as I've said before, that everything we call a medical problem, everything we call a psychiatric problem, whether it's ADHD, whether it's depression, anxiety, or even things like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, irritable bowel syndrome, even cancers, folks. These are the result of a breakdown of a relationship on the nervous system level. And in some of the videos I've done and ones to come, I will deal with stress and what I'm calling the stress overload, and how that begins to downregulate or upregulate, and what are the medical conditions that are a result of the downregulating. Would be a sluggish HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenocorticoids, which creates the Crohn's disease, which creates fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue. It causes autoimmune issues, and that's a down-regulating of the nervous system. But when it comes to how does it originate? What is the etiology, as doctors we talk about? The etiology is relationship. It's the breakdown of relationship. And if we want to restore people to loving God and loving each other, we want to restore health, and not just do preventive medicine. Not to do just damage repair, but to actually do preventive medicine, preventive science, preventive treatment. So I believe that in order to accomplish this task, in my life and yours, that we have to create this, what I'm calling this two-track theory. The two-track theory is one that we need to learn how to encourage each other, circle one. Circle two, we need to learn how to exhort one another. And in circle three, we need to learn how to enlighten one another. And some passages I mentioned for you Christian folks. Hebrews 3, Hebrews 10, and 1 Thessalonians 5, and many other places. That would be track one, actually teaching men and women how to do this, how to be able to think Christianly as a way of life, and then for those who are called to be in the helping profession, to be able to know how to go to the next level in terms of our helping skills. And I believe that's track one. And then track two would be learning the scientific skills, the medical skills, the neuroscientific skills, to learn how to put these two very, very complex disciplines and to create that unified picture of the Christian worldview. Because I believe the Christian worldview, rightfully understood, provides the glue, the gorilla glue, the unifying structure that's missing today. We have 1,100 different folks. Listen, 1,100 different treatments out there for people today in the world of mental health. But I believe that the Christian worldview, rightfully understood, can provide that unifying factor, that framework, that provides the kind of healing that we need, that Isaiah says to us, the book of Isaiah, by his stripes we're healed. And what does that healing come from? It comes from something more than modern medicine. It means something more than the atonement for theologians and Christians. It means something more than what's happening in our wonderful world of charismatic movements and our Pentecostal brothers and sisters. It means something more than that, nothing less, but a lot more. And so in these upcoming videos and lectures, I want to provide what are the missing ingredients that can provide that unifying picture in my life and your life. And the missing ingredient is the absence of relationship, the absence of a comprehensive understanding of relationship, of what's happening in my life and in your life. And I just want to thank you for listening to this very brief video, and hold on to your seats. There's many, many more. I have a lot to say, and I have a lot to share with you. And I wish you the best, and stay tuned. You can find me on WordPress, Dr. Archie at WordPress. You can check out these videos at Dr. Archie Johnson, The Talking Cure, and plenty other videos and audio lectures as well. And in the days to come, I appreciate your prayers for my upcoming books, The Christian Cure, The Kairos Cure, and then the second edition of The Talking Cure. Take care, and I'll see you soon.